When you think of your own version of the American dream, what comes to mind? If I was a betting man, I would say a part of that dream is to own your own home. I can confidently make that bet because owning your own home is one of the most important parts of the American dream. Home ownership tops the charts when it comes to the most important part of the American dream. It's ahead of having children, a successful career, retirement, and even owning a car. This is where our problem arises. Housing and real estate are holding back most people financially. If you don't already own a home, you likely can't afford one, and even worse, if you can't afford one, you may still be struggling to even rent one. If you're a millennial or Gen Z wanting to become a first-time homeowner, but you don't understand how to make the numbers work, take solace in the fact that you're not alone. Last year, the average first-time home buyer was 35 years old, so the older half of the millennial generation. Additionally, first-time homeowners only had a 32% share of the real estate market last year. This is one of the lowest shares of new home ownership, along with the oldest average age of new home owners in the last 40 years. This all makes sense as rent prices, as compared to pre-pandemic prices, are up 36%, and home prices are tracking pretty close to that as well. This raises the question, if first-time homeowners only had 32% share of the real estate market last year, who made up the rest of the market? Unsurprising answer is repeat buyers. More specifically, repeat buyers from Generation X, with the average age of repeat buyers being 59 years old. This data alone makes it feel safe to say that gone are the days where you can graduate high school or college and buy your first house in your early 20s. Like, those days are long gone. But I suspected this before seeing this data, and I'd hate to fall victim to confirmation bias, so in order to be as objective as possible, I want to dig into the additional data surrounding the current real estate market, along with the outlook for the younger generation. Digging into this data will help explain how we got here, where we're going, and if there's any fixing the problem. I'm Seth. This is Acquired Salary. Let's talk about real estate. To answer the question if millennials and Gen Z are doomed to a life of owning nothing and being forced to be happy with it. Stick around to the end because some of this data is rather surprising. Now, before we get too far into the weeds of housing affordability, I want to show everyone that we're not currently in a housing market crash, and this is reinforced by the fact that median sales price of homes compared to last year is up 5% year over year. This is outpacing inflation, at least Federal Reserve reported inflation. And to that point, people thinking that a housing market crash is the solution are simply wrong, and here's why. So we can take a look at the Federal Reserve's FOMC meeting minutes from December of 2007. They can be quoted saying how terrible a housing market and stock market crash would be. My contacts at large district banks tell me that because the economy continues to be reasonably healthy and people have jobs, things are still under control. But if housing prices and the stock market fall further and the economy appears to be weakening, then they will further tighten the lending conditions and terms on consumer loans to avoid problems down the road, and these fears could be self-fulfilling. The Federal Reserve essentially said declines would lead to a recession, and the worst thing to say when it comes to investing is this time is different. This time isn't different. The Fed has said the economy is reasonably healthy because we have GDP growth and strong job numbers. But the data is misleading, as I have discussed in my recent video on the job market. We're at a point where a crash in the housing market and or a stock market could end up being a self-fulfilling prophecy that causes a recession. People lose their jobs and their homes during a recession, so you would have to luck out in order to have the housing market crash and impending recession benefit you, because the vast majority of people suffer during a recession rather than prosper. Not only do we want to avoid a recession for all the pain people would face, but looking back to 2008, the largest housing market crash in history, or at least in recent history, we saw an average decline in home value of 21%. If we saw declines like this again, with all the inflation we have seen in recent years, this would quite literally be setting housing prices back just a few years, if that. So, yes, housing would be more affordable to some, but with the risks of recession, it would only become more attainable to those that keep their job because the declines do not eliminate the need for a mortgage. This is important because qualifying for a mortgage is typically the biggest obstacle for people when it comes to affording a home. And this comes down to not making enough money and not being able to save for a down payment. 42% of non-homeowners say mortgage qualification is what is preventing them from buying a home. This checks out if we take a closer look at wages and the recommended cost of a home. To start, we need to look to financial experts and what they recommend in terms of budgeting for your home and how much it should cost, so you don't put yourself in a risky situation. Fidelity recommends that a house should cost no more than 3 to 5 times your income. This allows people to afford their mortgage and continue to save for retirement. This is great advice, if not for the fact that this is virtually impossible for the median income earner. Median wages, according to the Federal Reserve's most recent report, are roughly $60,000 a year. So, following the conservative end of Fidelity's recommendation, if we opt for a home price or a home budget of 3 times the annual income of the median income earner, that affords a home of $180,000. Going on the less conservative end of it, you can afford a home that is $300,000. This is where we get into the really big problem. The math doesn't add up. The median home price in America, according to the Federal Reserve, is $417,000. The median home price in metropolitan areas, where most people would be working and looking to live, reflect even higher prices. This makes the sound home budget buying rule untenable. Budgets have to be stretched at a minimum of 40% to buy the average home. I know this has not historically been the case based on anecdotal evidence. My numbers may be slightly off, but after college, I believe my uncle was making around $20,000 a year, and he bought his first home for roughly $55,000. So he was able to afford a home, being even more conservative than what the financial institutions recommend. To figure out where things went wrong, we have to take a look at incomes and how they've changed over the years. Now, before I go on any further on the housing market problem, if you find value in what you're hearing, please share this video with someone that might benefit from its message, because it is word-of-mouth referrals like this that help grow Acquired Salaries reach, so we can continue to give you free tools, information, and perspectives to get a leg up in life. Getting back to yearly incomes, we can take a look at the median home price over time when compared to incomes, and the problem becomes very obvious.
So first, let's go back to the median U.S. housing price over the past 50 years, up to 2022. And now add income onto it. Yeah.
Median wages have not kept pace with the increase in the cost of housing.
The median income has not kept up with the median home price, making it impossible to follow the housing budget rule of 3 to 5 times your income. Taking a look at today's medians, the $417,000 average home price is equal to roughly 7 times the median income earner's wages. This is over twice the most conservative estimate recommended by financial institutions. This then raises the question of, how did houses become so expensive? Simple. There's a mismatch in supply and demand curves. From a psychological perspective, the high demand for home ownership makes sense. This is because home ownership is where the vast majority of Americans build and hold their wealth. So, everyone sees it as their ticket to financial stability, and therefore it's in high demand. The high demand increases prices, but this is compounded by a low supply. The housing supply is at an all-time low according to the St. Louis Fed housing vacancy rate. This is also backed up by data from Freddie Mac showing a total of $3.8 million housing deficit. This raises the question of, why is the housing deficit so large? And the answer is multifactorial. First and foremost, over 80% of current mortgage borrowers have an interest rate that is less than 5%. At the same time, the average new mortgage interest rate is at 7%. Typically, for every 1% increase in Federal Reserve's interest rate, we see a decrease in housing affordability by 10%. So, in order for an existing borrower to make a horizontal housing move and afford the same size house, the housing prices have to have seen a decline of 20%. Otherwise, to move into the same caliber of house, it would be making a move into less financial stability or its lower affordability. As I mentioned earlier, housing prices are up 5% year over year in spite of the increase in interest rates. So the incentive for most borrowers to move is extremely low. This is a positive feedback loop in a negative direction. There's a supply and demand issue making home prices increase, but the housing price increases make it to where people do not want to sell, further lowering supply. This is reflected in list prices as active list prices are seeing a continual decrease in the percentage of homes that are affordable to the median income earner, and the percentage of houses listed that are unaffordable for the median income earner is increasing. So if existing houses are not going to be brought to market and the ones that are brought to market are unaffordable, then we need to build more homes. This is where the second contributing factor to the supply shortage comes into play: zoning laws. Specifically, zoning laws in major metropolitan cities where demand is highest limit the number of new houses that can be built. Now, with all this laid out on the table, what's the solution? Assuming you're not the Federal Reserve with the ability to change interest rates, nor a politician with the ability to change zoning laws, I see a few options. Hashtag not financial advice, but the options I see are to follow the financial order of operations. You can find a cheap place to rent, and once you've completed the order of operations, you can invest the difference and your discretionary income into the stock market. Although you won't get the leverage advantage you are afforded with home ownership, you can make a higher rate of return investing in the stock market until you're able to finally afford a home. Exercising this delayed gratification is going to set you apart from the average American and make it so that one day you will be able to reach your version of the American dream. What do you think? Please share your thoughts and comments in the comment section below, and if you've made it this far into the video, you may as well like the episode and subscribe to this channel so you do not miss out on future videos like the one where I discussed why the job market sucks. Until next time.